Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the virtual home of Princeton Public Library here on Zoom. My name is Janie Herman, and I am the Adult Programming Manager here at Princeton Public Library. It's my great pleasure today to host this afternoon's program, where we are welcoming 3 guests from South Africa to discuss the North American release of the memoir, Doing Life with Mandela, My Prisoner, My Friend. Before we begin, I'd like to extend special thanks to Ethan Casey of Blue Ear Books for his assistance with arranging the details for today's conversation. If you'd like to purchase a copy of Doing Life with Mandela, My Prisoner, My Friend, I will be putting a link in the chat for you to click on. Please note that this event is being recorded and our events typically go up on the library's YouTube channel within a few days. If you have friends or colleagues who could not make it today, let them know it's been recorded so they can view the replay. I will now introduce our guests and ask them to turn on their cameras to join us on screen. During their conversation, please feel free to ask questions using the Q&A function or in the chat for our panelists to answer at the end of the conversation. So first up, I'd like to introduce Ethan. Ethan Casey is a working editor, author, and ghostwriter, and a veteran journalist. He is the owner of Blue Ear Books and the publisher of the North American version of the book we are here to discuss. Andrew Russell is the owner of Cape Africa Tours, the director of the nonprofit Sports for Kids, and the managing agent for Christo Brand. He was the editor of Christo Brand's updated book and is now writing his own book on lessons from Mandela, which will be published in 2023. Christo Brand, an Afrikaner farms boy from South Africa, was 18 when he reported for duty as a prison guard in 1978 at the prison on Robben Island in South Africa. He did not know then that his life would be changed forever by prisoner 46664, also known as Nelson Mandela. And our final guest today is Igshaan Amlay, who is a former political prisoner of the South African government. He's also an entrepreneur, social activist, and organizer of the Formula One Grand Prix events in Cape Town, South Africa. So with this, I'm going to disappear myself into the background. Ethan is going to say a few words and we'll get right on to the main event. So excited to have everyone here with us today and looking forward to a great presentation.
Thank you, Janie. I'm going to say a very few words. As Janie said, I'm the publisher of the new edition of Christo's book, Doing Life with Mandela, My Prisoner, My Friend. The publishing company is called Blue Ear Books, blueearbooks.com. And I worked for 2 years almost 2 years, very closely with Andrew Russell to edit the new edition of Christo's book. And Andrew and Christo will be telling you more about that. We added a substantial amount of new material, an updated chapter about life since Mandela, and a special section with 16 new writings by people who knew both Christo Brand and Nelson Mandela. And one of those is Igshaan Amlay, who's here today. I'm deeply honored to be the publisher of this book, and working with Andrew to bring it to publication has been one of the highlights of my own career. I want to say only one more thing before I hand it over to Andrew, and that is thank you very, very much to Janie and the Princeton Public Library for hosting this event. I've known Janie for a decade now, and she's a fantastic person to work with. So with that, I'll turn it over to Andrew.
Thanks very much, Ethan. And thank you, Janie, for inviting us to share some time with you. So this evening, we are going to go on a journey. It's a journey of 3 men, Christo Brand, Nelson Mandela, and Igshaan Amlay. And there is a quote which we start off with, which really kind of captures Mandela's entire philosophy, that if we can learn to hate, we can also be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than the opposite. And so as we start our journey, Christo, I want you to start off and set the scene for our audience this evening, what life was like for you as a young boy growing up on that farm just outside Cape Town.
For me, growing up on a farm, I was the only white child playing with African children. My father was very poor, he was just a foreman. And one day I was disrespectful to the elderly African man when my father gave me hiding and said to me, "The person can be black, but a human being like us." We must respect each other as human beings. So I grew up on that farm with that respect.
And many years earlier, there was another young boy called Nelson Mandela, who grew up in the rural Eastern Cape region of South Africa. Here is a map of South Africa showing where the village is located on the East Coast. And this is what he wrote in his autobiography. It was in that village of Kunu that I spent the happiest years of my boyhood, and whence I trace my earliest memories. Kunu was situated in a narrow grassy valley, crisscrossed by clear streams and overlooked by green hills. There were no roads, only paths through the grass, worn away by barefoot boys and women. From an early age, I spent most of my free time in the veld, playing and fighting with other boys. From these days, I take my love of the veld, of open spaces, Nelson Mandela. And so you can see that these two young boys both grew up in a rural area where there were no signs of apartheid. They lived a free life surrounded by friends and family. They enjoyed carefree primary school days. And one of the things they both learned was to respect their adults. But there was a third boy who also grew up in Cape Town. And I want to now introduce Igshaan Amlay to you and ask Igshaan just to share with the audience what life was like for him as a colored boy growing up under the system of apartheid in South Africa.
When I was, I was born in a family that came out of forcibly removed. My mom was forcibly removed from under the Group Areas Act from District 6. My dad was forcibly removed from Simonstown. We were placed in an area called Grassy Park, which is on the Cape Flats, a low-income town. And there I was involved at a very young age. I witnessed how apartheid impacted the lives of my parents and ourselves. When we went to the beaches, it was like whites only on the one side, blacks only on the other side. We traveled on public transport. The whites sit at the bottom, the black people sit on top. You travel in a train, first class for the whites, third class for the blacks. You go into parks. You find benches that says whites only. You cannot sit there. You'll get a fine. When you go into town itself, coming from our area, and my mom maybe decided to go do shopping. We come into town, and there's areas that we couldn't go into because it was restricted for white people only. And that had a serious impact on my life because I couldn't understand why we were segregated. That became an issue for me.
All right, so that is the Cape Town that Igshaan grew up in. At the age of 12, Christo's father developed pneumonia, and the farmer chased them off the farm and said they must go and live in the city. And that was when Christo moved to Cape Town. And at the end of his school career, instead of joining the army, which was compulsory for all whites to do 2 years of national service, he had lost a friend of his on the border. And he was given the choice to become a prison guard rather than to do 2 years of compulsory national service. And that was when he decided at the end of school to become a prison guard. Nelson Mandela attended high school at Heald Town Secondary School. And he also, like Christo, moved to the city of Johannesburg. And now suddenly these two young men found themselves with a lack of freedom. They started seeing the first signs of apartheid, having to make new friends. There was no more wide open space, and they were both having to decide what to do after school and what to do for a living. And so at the tender age of 18, Christo finished his training and he was sent to work on Robben Island. This infamous island, which is located off the coast of Cape Town at the tip of Africa. Here is an aerial view of Robben Island. And here is a photograph of Christo in front of one of the ferries that used to transport him and the prisoners and visitors to and from the island. And so this 18-year-old boy arrived on the island. Christo, I want you to now take up your story. What happened on that first day when you reported for duty on Robben Island?
That first day when we arrived on the island, we was 21 youngsters between the age of 18 and 20, arrived on the island. They put us on a military parade, and the head of the prison welcomed us. And he told us we're going to meet the biggest criminals in the history of South Africa. He told these guys got life sentences. Some of them have double life sentences. We're here to break the spirit of these guys. These guys is here to do hard labor. If they don't work, we'll punish them by their food and visits and things like that. That was my first introduction. Then after that, the sergeant come and read our names, and we were sent in different directions. I was sent to the isolation section that morning. And when I arrived at the isolation section, I walk in fears. I don't know what to expect. I know people in isolation as people who can't behave in prison at all, which is totally isolated away from other prisoners. But when I opened that first door that morning, I see an elderly African man stand up from the floor. He slept on 2 mats, 3 blankets. It was terribly cold to stand bare feet with short pants, short sleeves on a cold cement. And he greeted me with respect. Good morning, sir. I look at his face, I look at his arms. I don't see any tattoos on him. So I just greet him. So I go to the second cell and I read this guy got life plus 15 years. But when I opened that cell, I was expecting a gangster with full of tattoos, but was a more elderly person greet me with respect. Then I just read the names Andrew Mlangeni, Walter Sisulu, Raymond Mushlaba, Nelson Mandela. I never heard this name before in my life.
And then Christo was rotated on the island. He spent time working in the limestone quarry before he was given an office job. He was told after 3 months that he was now going to work in this office, which was the heart of the prison. Christo, can you now share what happened that day when you reported for duty in your new office?
That morning when I reported for duty at that office, I was very excited. My superior welcomed me and he said, Brand, at the back of the office, there's 6 guys already busy unpacking big apple boxes of cards. You must take a box, throw it out on your table, count the cards back in a box, and write a total on the side of the box. I didn't know what cards it was. When I throw out that first box, I realized it's his birthday cards for Mandela's 60th birthday. So we count, write down the totals on the sides. After a few days, my superior come and he take up all the totals. And he said, guys, you won't believe. In this office today is 55,100 and a few odd cards. It was massive. Then a few days passed and the sergeant come back to us. He said, guys, we must unpack these cards again, but we must sort them out to different countries. Get empty boxes, put up America, Germany, Spain, Italy, sort out these boxes. So we take 1 box on a time to sort out these cards. But after 2 weeks, I observed there was 1 box in the corner marked South Africa, and that box only have 12 cards in. So I was curious. I asked the sergeant, why 12 cards from South Africa? Don't South Africans not know Nelson Mandela? His answer to me was, he said, Brand, if anybody in South Africa dare to send a card for Nelson Mandela, and the police identified that person should have been arrested, 90 days solid confinement, electrical shock, tortured, maybe killed, maybe disappeared. Out of that massive of cards, Mandela received 6 cards from his direct family. All the other cards were burnt and destroyed. That was my first introduction. Know how important this man was.
And then Christo's next job was to handle visits to the island. And on one occasion, his superintendent told him that Winnie Mandela was on her way to the island to visit Nelson Mandela. Christo, can you now share what happened that morning when you went to tell Mandela about his visitor? And when the 2 of you walked from the prison down to this building, what happened between the 2 of you?
That morning when I informed Mandela about his visit, he was still scrubbing the floors. He was very excited. He said, Mr. Brand, just give me a few minutes. They can change my prison uniform. I see the old man change his uniform, put some hair on his hair. He reported to me he's ready for visit. I put him a leg irons and I march him out of prison. That day when I walk him out of prison after a while, he looked back to me, asked me, Mr. Brand, where are you come from? You put a leg iron smooth around my ankles. You lift up the chains for me and you treat me with respect. I said, Mandela, I grew up on a farm and my father said I must respect elderly people. He said, that is good news, Mr. Brand. You can help me, give me advice in my prison garden. In a prison courtyard at the back, Mandela has a small piece of land where he planted some chilies, tomatoes, onions. That was to spice up the bad food. I didn't comment on that. We walked on, and then he looked back again. He asked me, Mr. Brand, is your parents still alive? I said, yes. He said, sent him my greetings. That was very strange to me. I didn't answer him on that. But just before we get to the visiting center, he looked back again. He asked me, Mr. Brand, are you studying? I said, no. He said, you must study. Studies is a promotion. Through studies, you can become the head of the prison. You can get promotion, and you can understand us as prisoners better. So I didn't comment on that. I just locked him in a single cell where he kept him till while more prisoners piled up.
And then Christo fetched the ladies from the boat, the visitors, and one of them was Winnie Mandela, who proceeded to take her raincoat off. And Christo saw she had a blanket wrapped around her body, which she then removed, and he saw that she had a backpack. But when she removed the backpack, he realized she had brought a baby infant to Robben Island. Immediately, Christo should have cancelled the visit, but Winnie started begging him if it was possible to show this baby, which was their granddaughter, to Nelson Mandela. The visit went on. Christo refused this to happen, but Christo, can you now share what happened at the end of that visit between you, Winnie, and Nelson Mandela?
At the end of the visit, we called Winnie Mandela back to the visiting booth. By that moment, I asked if I can hold the baby. I never held the African child. She pushed it to my arms. She grabbed the handbag. She tried to bribe me with some money. I said, ma'am, I don't want your money. I will just keep it for you while you see your husband again for 1 minute. At that moment, when she's in the visiting booth, I locked her in. I sneaked to the side of Mandela. After Mandela passed his message, we closed the window. He see me in the passage and he came to me. And that moment, when he take the baby out of my arms, he became quite emotional. There was tears in his eyes, and I could have not believed that. That same moment, Winnie Mandela knocked on the door, she's locked in. I quickly take the baby back from him, go to her side, apologize, and gave her the infant back. She was still begging me to show me the child, which the answer was no.
That secret stayed between Christo and Nelson Mandela for 20 years until he was the president of the country. Here is a note that Winnie wrote in a book which she presented to Christo many years later. My dearest Brunt, the wonderful memories we share are priceless. I remember how you refused to accept a gift from me because you were and still are so principled. Thanks for all the wonderful things you did for Madiba in prison. Only God can thank you. You are amazing, Winnie Mandela. Our story now moves on to this day, 15th of October, 1985, where I now want Igshaan to share what happened on that day. But before he does, I just want to clarify, we spoke about Igshaan being a colored person. So in South Africa, according to the racial classifications of the government, there were black, white, colored, and Indian were the 4 different race groups. So a colored person would be a person outside South Africa would have been called a mixed race person. So Igshaan, can you now share with us what happened on this day, 15th of October, 1985?
As an activist and a member of the SRC on the Student Representative Council of our school, we attended mass rallies in Cape Town. And on the 15th, we attended a mass rally in Wynberg, where one of the activists who was a former minister, and he's passed on a few months back, Graham Block. He was going to speak and address the students at Wynberg High in Ottery Road. We as a group of students and activists, we all marched down Ottery Road. On our way, we stopped buses, we stopped vehicles, we gathered all the necessities should the police come and we can attack, and that was getting our petrol bombs and our tires in place. We ended up going to Wynberg High School. When we got there, the school was filled with students. A few minutes passed and the whole school was surrounded by the security police. The one policeman came in and they wanted to arrest Graham Block, and he announced on the horn in Afrikaans that you have 1 minute, you have 3 minutes to disperse. And at that time, we were all standing at the back, and I remember picking up half a brick, and I threw the brick in their direction. And once I think it hit one of the policemen, and they all fell back. They left Graham Block. They ran out on the other side, and then chaos erupted. The police fired tear gas and into the school, and everybody scrammed out. As we scrammed out, I ran down Douglas, one of the roads, into Park Road. When I got there, the security police was already in vans, and they came down. I ended up going towards what we call a cinema, and it was a boundary wall. And I sat on the inside of the boundary wall, and I lit petrol bombs, and I was tossing it over the wall under the vehicles. One vehicle came with 2 policemen in. I threw a petrol bomb, and it fell under the vehicle. The vehicle, the fire within the petrol bomb, as actually the flames was quite big. They reversed out, and at that time, a Casper, which is one of these big armored vehicles, came. As you can see on the pic, the yellow one, he came down the road with the police, the South African military force, or as we call, they came in, and that was all part of the security police as well. And as they came, they started shooting tear gas and directed at us. As they came closer, they started taking out the live ammunition, and they were about to fire. And then all of us ran into a house, which was based right next door to the cinema. That house is a family that I got to know over years, and all the students that was at school with us, they lived there as well, and they were also people that were well watched by the security police because they were very active. Once in the house, we all ran into a room. There was about 30 of us, students from all over. We all closed the door, and then while we heard the police coming around into the grounds of the house, then while we were in the room, one of the policemen came and he put his hand through the window with his firearm. And when everybody saw that, they all rushed to the door and started running out. As we ran out of the house, we were the last to go out, of the last to go out. As they moved us out, I was pulled out on the one side, and I was led down the passage. And as I walked down the passage, I just felt this pain in my back, where one of the security police fired back buckshot, and the buckshot was shot towards me into my back. And a policeman got me at the front door, and he grabbed me, and he grabbed another female, and they put us in the van. From there, we went to the police station, which is possibly about 5 kilometers away, but they took about a 10-kilometer drive with us, driving over gravel, trying to injure us because we're sitting in the back of the vehicle. We ended up coming to Wynberg police station, and all of us got escorted into the charge office. Once we were in the charge office, each of us were taken individually into a room. I was told to sit in the chair. The one policeman came, and he told me he was security police, and he came and he took a petrol bomb, had it in his hand, and he told me, hold this. And I looked at him and said, no, I won't hold it. And he said, no, I must hold it. I said, I refuse to hold it. And in my mind was that would automatically become evidence that it was mine. We were then taken into custody, arrested, and placed into police cells for 2 days. While we were in the police cells, we had the various activists trying to release us. We ended up being charged. We were charged for public violence. At court, there were initially 10 of us. One went into exile, one got acquitted, and one was given a delayed sentence. We were all charged. I was charged for possession of a petrol bomb, for possession of petrol bombs, damaging government property, assaulting a policeman, burning barricades, of which all was true. I won't deny it, but it wasn't on the day. There was a few things I did possibly prior to that, but on that day, I know I tossed petrol bombs. I did throw bricks at the cops. And from there, we had a long, lengthy trial. I was the youngest of the group. When I was arrested, I was 15. We got sentenced in 1986, and they couldn't send us to prison because I was still the youngest arrested person. They had to wait for me to turn 18. So I only turned 18 in 1987. And there was a group from Europe that was monitoring South Africa at that time. And they were making sure that no human rights, they weren't breaking the laws of the human rights laws. And I was in one Saturday morning, my birthday was on the Monday, on the Wednesday. The Saturday morning, I came to a shop and I saw in the newspaper, the front page, Wynberg 7 loses appeal and has to start serving the sentence.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll stop it there because we'll carry on shortly. Thank you, Igshaan. Christo's journey from Robben Island moved to Pollsmoor in 1982 when he got married, and there were no married quarters on the island. So they moved him to this prison, the one where Igshaan was going to be sentenced. And so from 1982 to 1988, the authorities also moved the 4 most powerful prisoners from Robben Island. One of these was Nelson Mandela, and they were moved to Pollsmoor prison, and Christo was put in charge of them for the next 6 years. Here is a couple of recent photographs of Christo in the section where Mandela was held. They started playing tennis with the prisoners, table tennis. The bottom left-hand corner is on the rooftop of that prison, and that is where Christo helped Nelson Mandela create a garden. And so this is now Christo Brand as a warder at Pollsmoor. And I now want to go back to Igshaan, because this is the day that Igshaan was sentenced to prison in Pollsmoor. Igshaan, I want you to just share with the audience how you came across Christo, and just as briefly as you can. I know there were a lot of things he did for you, but maybe just share a couple of things that Christo did for you when you arrived at prison as an 18-year-old and you met him.
We arrived at Pollsmoor maximum security with our parents, and we were accompanied by thousands of students with helicopters hovering, Caspers on standby, security police on standby, monitoring the situation. And they all marched with us to Pollsmoor to escort us into prison. Once we were escorted by our parents at the one gate, they were told, this is as far as they go. From there on, we'll be taken on. I was the youngest of the lot. I was nervous in the beginning, but I embraced it because I knew what I was in, what I went in for was to fighting a system that we were all against. Once I entered Pollsmoor, we were taken to a cell, and a big cell alone. The females, there were 2 females with us. They were sent to the female section, and then the 5 of us were sent to the A section in Pollsmoor maximum. On arrival there, we were taken in and given our blankets and given our clothes, etc. I met Christo. Christo introduced himself and he came in, but there was something about Christo that he was totally different to the others. And I looked at him and I thought to myself, this man is totally different, the way he speaks to you, the way he is with you. And I ended up befriending Christo. While we were there, Christo was seeing to our studies. He managed to make sure that we got our studies. We had to write exams. We were not allowed any literature. Christo smuggled in Mandela's newspapers for me in the evening when he used to be on shift. He comes and he drops off a newspaper, brings it into the cell. I have about 2 hours to read it because then he collects it again so that nobody can see there's any trace. One day we were on our way to the medical section, and there was 2 activists. One was the former ambassador for USA, Ibrahim Rasool. He was laying on a stretcher on a drip, and one was another activist, Ashley Forbes. I saw them laying there, and then I went back to the cell. Nobody knew they were detained under Section 29. I made a note and I asked Christo to please take that note to my mom so that she can pass it on to their family to let them know where they were, because nobody knew where they were. Christo managed to do that for me. Christo brought in, whenever I needed cigarettes, he took letters out for me. And one day he came to me and he told me, listen, I have to go with him. And I asked him where he said, no, I must just go with him. And he fetched me and we went to the section where you have a visiting section. And while I was standing there was a room, and he told me, just go inside. And when I walked in, it was Nelson Mandela was standing there. And I looked at him, and this was the person that we fought for. And we fought for his freedom. And I looked at him and I thought to myself, but the pictures that we had of him, was he having beard and with his short hair, but this looks like the older version then of Nelson Mandela. And I greeted him, and Christo came in, escorted Mandela away. And he just told me, you know what, this must never go out to anybody. Nobody must know. And that secret had been kept with me for as long as, even when I came out and when I was released, I mentioned that, you know what, this is what, and people were shocked. And I asked Christo one day, I told Christo, which was so strange, I said, Christo, I feel for hot chips because, you know, the food in the prison is not. Christo ended up going to a place in Wynberg where I'm from. He managed to get, and he brought it in, and he told me I better eat it quickly because it smells that will smell the smell of that food everybody will be able to smell that it came. And you know, the Christo's done such a lot for us, and not only for me but for many other activists as well. And it's something that it's irreplaceable. You cannot replace when people do things for you at a time of need. And we've been friends from the day of my release up until still now. We are in contact on a regular basis. We speak to each other on a weekly basis. I visit his family, he visits me, and our relationship, he's like a father figure to me, and I look up to Christo, as there's lots of people that don't realize the impact he has had on many detainees and many prisoners, and the risk he took, because even the risk that he took when he brought me the newspapers when it was banned literature, if they had to catch him, that would have been treason and he would have been sentenced. When we were released, became the youngest former political prisoner in our country, because after 88, our country was in talks and the transformation process was taking place up until 1991.
Thank you, Igshaan. So our journey moves forward to this day when Nelson Mandela was released from Victor Verster, taken to Cape Town City Hall, where he made Cape Town City Hall. And on the 10th of May, 1994, he was inaugurated as the first democratically elected president of South Africa. Until 1994, only white adults had been allowed to vote in general elections. This was the first election in South Africa where adults of all race groups could vote. The ANC won the election and Mandela became our president. And in the ensuing years, Christo was in contact with Mandela on numerous occasions. He was invited to functions. He was at his 80th birthday, his 85th birthday, and they saw each other regularly. But what I want to now ask Christo to share with you is, as I read this quote, the power of education. Education is the great engine of personal development. It is through education that the daughter of a peasant can become a doctor, that the son of a mine worker can become the head of the mine, that a child of farm workers can become the president of a great nation. It is what we make out of what we have, not what we are given, that separates one person from another. So Christo, as we start getting towards the end of our conversation, can you just share a little bit about what happened between your son and Nelson Mandela?
In 1985, Mandela was put in isolation. That's the time he started talking with government. That was one evening, I must take an urgent message to him. So I take my baby infant with to the cell. That time I was an officer already. When I walked in, Mandela was so excited to see my son. He wanted to hold my son, but my son didn't want to come to him till he started feeding him some sweets. But after his Mandela's release, he phoned at home. And every time my son ran for the phone first, when he pick up the phone, Mandela will always find out it's my boy. Always tell him to educate hard. And through education, you can make your parents proud of yourself. Always talk about that. 94, Mandela became the president. I started working in parliament. I worked with the drafting of the constitution. And one morning I was called in by the president. And that morning we drink a coffee together, and then he drafted a letter for me. And he said, this letter you gave your son tomorrow morning for his birthday. That's a letter you see on the screen. But 96, the constitution was adopted. Mandela gave me a job offer at the Mandela Foundation. I didn't want to work for the foundation at that stage because it was far from Cape Town. Then they offered me a job at the Robben Island Museum. So I started working, selling the ticket sales, curio shops, do private tours and things for the museum. But while I worked there, Mandela called me one day in again to his office for coffee. And that morning he said to me, Mr. Brand, your son, what is he going to study next year? Because your son is a second small child I met in prison, and your son is my responsibility. I said, President Mandela, you catch me off guard. But my son mentioned something about civil engineering. He said, leave it in my hands. I will get him a scholarship. 2 weeks passed, I get a phone call from the president. He phoned me. He said, Brand, I've got a scholarship for your son, but it's in New York. Everything will be paid in full, and he can study as long as you want. I'll make sure he got pocket money, got a plane ticket to come to home to South Africa. I was very excited. But when I tell my son about the scholarship, he was not interested in all to leave the country. He said he first wanted to become a commercial diver. After 3 years, he will study civil engineering. Immediately the next morning, I phoned the president and explained him that. He said to me, Brand, can you bring the boy to my house 2 o'clock? I want to speak man on man with him. So I take my son to Mandela's house on that day, and I have the conversation. After the conversation, he called me in and he said to me, Brand, we made the same mistakes as my parents have done in life. You listen to your child when he's a small boy, what you want to become. You must listen to your son, what you want to become now. Your son want to become a commercial diver. I will support him, back him up, and paid for his courses. So Mandela paid for the courses for my son. He became a commercial diver, and Mandela gave a letter of recommendation. He found a job with a private company, Marion Roberts, and they get a tender on Robben Island. And he started work also on Robben Island. In 2005, the site come to an end, and they moved to another spot in Cape Town where they also do diving. And then one evening, he was in a car accident. On the way to hospital, my son had passed in an accident. Without me informed Mandela about the death of my son, he phoned me the next morning and said to me, Brand, a parent must never lose a child. And he started explaining to me, when he get my son's message, immediately think back of his days in prison. When he get a telegram from his wife, Winnie, that his son died in a car accident. He never can think back. He never could have said goodbye to his son the day when his son was sentenced. He could have never write a letter to his son. His son was never allowed to visit him. Only get a telegram his son have passed. Then he said to me, Mr. Brand, a parent must never lose a child. A child must rather lose a parent. So what happened? Mandela was not in the country. He made some excuses. He would love to be at the funeral, but he will only be back in 2 weeks' time. I said, President Mandela, I really respect that. I know in your heart you will be with us as a family. But that day of the funeral, Robben Island Museum closed their doors. Ex-prisoners come and attend my son's funeral, which know my son. People from Parliament was there. We had Dutch Reformed Church. The church was packed. It was too small for everybody. When a priest walked in, he sees people from different cultures in the church. Immediately started a sermon in English. And so I was very supported that day of my son's funeral by people from different cultures in our country and my friends.
And then after that, Nelson Mandela started putting pressure on Christo to write his book. And 6 years later, Christo eventually shared his manuscripts with a lady called Barbara Jones from the Mail on Sunday. And the first edition of his book was ready to be released when, unfortunately, on the 5th of December 2013, Nelson Mandela passed away. The launch of Christo's book was then postponed until the following year. But at the funeral on the 14th of December 2013, Christo was invited to attend the funeral as a guest of the Nelson Mandela family. He sat with the family at the funeral. Here are some photographs taken on that day of Nelson Mandela's funeral. Christo, we're going to move on now because we're running a little bit out of time. So I'm just going to go through to this day when Christo's book was launched in London. And Zindzi Mandela, unbeknown to Christo, flew to London. Zindzi was Nelson Mandela's daughter. And she told him that her father's last wish was that if he could not be at Christo's book launch, she must represent him. And so Zindzi Mandela was at Christo's book launch. Here are some photographs just to show you how Christo and Igshaan have maintained their friendship right up until Christo's 60th birthday, which was held just before lockdown. And here is a copy of Long Walk to Freedom, which was presented to Christo and his family by Nelson Mandela himself. And these are the two quotes from Long Walk to Freedom where he mentions Christo. One of the warders, a very pleasant young man named Warrant Officer Brand, actually took me to his family's flat and introduced me to his wife and children. From then on, I sent his children Christmas cards every year. And men like Warrant Officer Brand reinforced my belief in the essential humanity, even of those who had kept me behind bars for the previous 27.5 years. And so this is now the second edition of Christo's book, which we published, as Ethan said, at the end of last year. You can order it directly on Amazon, but you do need to type in Doing Life with Mandela. And then if you put in my name, because I was the editor, it will take you to the new edition of the book. I won't go through everything that is now in the new book, but we have updated it with a lot of extra sections. And the most amazing section is these 16 articles written by a wide variety of people, including Mandela's daughter, Zora Kathrada, who was Ahmed Kathrada's niece, Mary Burton, who was one of the Truth and Reconciliation commissioners, Lionel Davis, and also Igshaan Amlay contributed to the new book with his story and what he went through. And so as we now get to the end of our conversation, I just want to let you all know that we are coming to the United States in November, the first 2 weeks of November, on a speaking tour. Christo will be sharing his story, and I am busy with a book which Ethan will be publishing this year called The Leadership We Need, Lessons for Today from Nelson Mandela. And those are the talks we will be offering. So if you would like to be in touch with us, contact us to arrange an event with Christo while we are in America. There is my email address, info@christobrand.co.za. And now as we come to the end of our talk, Igshaan, Christo, and I want to say good luck to each and every one of you on your own journey, wherever it may take you, and to leave you with our favorite quote from Nelson Mandela. And I think if this is ever personified, it is by what Christo did for people like Igshaan. What counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived. It is what difference we have made to the lives of others that will determine the significance of the life we lead. Nelson Mandela, 1918 to 2013. So I'd like to, on behalf of Igshaan and Christo, thank you for listening to our conversation this evening, the journey of these three men. There's a lot more that we could have spoken about, but I'm sure there are going to be questions now. And what I'm going to do is stop sharing and pass back to Janie, and she will moderate any questions that anyone might have for Christo or Igshaan.
Wow, that was really, really fascinating. Ethan, if you want to turn your camera back on and join us, please. back on the screen. Thank you so much, Igshaan and Christo, for sharing your stories, and Andrew for moderating that so expertly. Really fascinating. I have to say that prior to our planning this, I was not aware of the Weinberg Seven and that entire story and what happened there. I was actually, my first introduction myself to Mandela, I was first year undergraduate at university when posters started going up all around campus, Free Mandela. And that was my introduction. And, that was about 1984. That I first really became aware of who Nelson Mandela was up in Canada and what was happening in South Africa with apartheid. And Ethan, do you want to just tell us a little bit about, I know Andrew alluded to it, but what is unique about this edition while we wait for some of the questions to come in?
Yeah, it's was the main thing, Janie, thanks for asking, is that new section of 16 articles by people who knew both Christo and Mandela. That gives a sort of panoramic view of the impact of both men and how they both the relationship between them, but also the relationship between them and many other people around South Africa, and indeed the world. There, in addition to the people that Andrew listed, there are activists and academics and journalists from Europe and America included in those 16. One of my, there's a lot that I could say, but I'll put in a recommendation for John Carlin, who's a British journalist and author who wrote a fantastic book called Playing the Enemy about the 1995 Rugby World Cup, which was held in South Africa and was, Carlin feels, perhaps the highlight of Nelson Mandela's entire political career, and that's of course saying a lot. That's just a fantastic story, and Carlin tells it masterfully. Carlin knew Christo and knows Christo, and was responded with alacrity when Andrew invited him to contribute to the book. There's also a further reading section that Andrew wrote, recommending other books about Mandela and by Mandela and about the apartheid time, and also an additional chapter called Life Without Mandela, or Life After Mandela, written by Andrew, updating Christo's story to the present day.
Great. We do have a question here about, and this is for each of you, for Igshaan, Christo, and Andrew. What life lesson was learned after the passing of Nelson Mandela? And I guess you could answer this both from either your personal perspective or maybe, from the perspective of, South Africans in general. So what was your biggest life lesson that you reflected on after the passing of Nelson Mandela?
Christo, you go first.
Well, I first. What I will say, what we learn from Mandela is to respect each other, help each other in life, go the extra mile for people. Like Mandela said, if you receive a lot of money, don't give for poor people money. Help people with education. The more you can help people with education, the more they can help themselves in life. And he said, the more you educate and help people around you, will be blessed with good life. And he was the one who go the extra mile. Even in prison, I remember, he will take his last property money off to help other prisoner to study and do himself in, not to register for a subject that year. That was Mandela. And he was always respectful to people, always treat people with respect.
I think, Janie, what I did during lockdown was I started seeing the lack of role models in terms of leaders around the world. And that was what inspired me to write a book about Mandela's leadership and what can we all learn from his leadership and take into our lives. But one of the things he did in South Africa was to have the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which he set up in order for people who had committed political crimes to be allowed to apply for amnesty. And Bishop Desmond Tutu was head of that Reconciliation Commission. Mary Burton was one of the commissioners who wrote an article in the book. And basically it was an incredibly intense period in our history where people came forward from both sides and confessed political crimes that they had committed. And it allowed people to have closure in many, many cases. It wasn't a perfect system, but it was a system that Mandela insisted that we have in South Africa. Because if the country was going to heal, we had to open those wounds and we had to share what happened on both sides of the spectrum. So that was something that I will always be thankful to him for, was this opening up of the wounds and hopefully the healing that could then take place in the country.
From my side, my life lesson would be that, and this goes out to everybody, is we need to seriously consider and respect time, because time is something that you can never get back. And the time I spent with you is precious time. That time I can never get back, but it's the memories that lingers on. So in anything you do, and in practice in daily life, I will even tell the students I speak to, all my even friends of mine, I will tell them, you know what, you need to look at, you need to appreciate time to appreciate life, because time is something nobody can give you back. And even my time I spent in is but a drop in the ocean of the time Nelson Mandela spent. But I think it's more about what we've done with our time and our contribution that was important.
I agree. So we have a question here, thanking everybody for sharing this. This is from somebody who is a South African Indian named Kabir Singh. He says, as a South African Indian now living in Germany, I know this is only possible because of heroes like you. And so they want to ask Christo, how did you manage both working with your superiors and the prison wardens, but still balance a good relationship with the political prisoners? So how were you able to navigate, treating the political prisoners with such respect, what they deserved, while reporting to your higher ups?
That was very difficult. But when I work in a prison, I was interviewed sometimes by the intelligence and our head office people. There was one day they came for an interview, I can recall. They interviewed my friends before me, which was working with me, and then me. They asked us, what do you think about Mandela, Sisulu, and these people in this prison? And I answered them what I want them to hear, not what I feel. And I said to him, I think we waste our time to look after these guys. They should have hanged them that time, then we never sit with them today. They was very happy with that answer I gave them, so I could walk off. And they never asked me any questions again. They think I was the right person to work with him. Then when I get promotion, I become a higher rank. They respect me and they give me some instructions. Sometimes I change the instructions myself and do things my own way. I remember the head of the prison said one day, Brand, you're in charge there. I don't want to interfere with these political people. They're too much full of trouble and nonsense. So I was taking some decisions, which I done for them to help them to bring food and things in to make it easy and helpful for them. But after Mandela was released, one of my superiors called me one day. He said, you're a sellout for the white people. If we know you smuggle with these guys over the years, you should have been tortured, arrested, be killed, not be here today. Look what happened in our country. We should put all the black people out of prison because white people like you selling us off. And the guy was upset with me. But a few years later, I stopped at a gas station. This guy came to me and I tried to avoid him. And he walked to me and said, Brand, I must apologize to you. I never thought Mandela will walk out with a changed mindset in this country. I never thought Mandela will put up the apartheid jersey that we win. People like Mandela, we need many, many years earlier, because we thought he will walk out with hatred in this country, but he walked out with reconciliation, try to bring people together. People's mindset have changed too.
Great. That must have been very, very, very challenging. Now I have a question here, and I'm going to do, this question is referring to Nelson Mandela, and he says, and this is for Igshaan, and says, knows this must be a difficult question for you, recognizing Mandela's vision for the Rainbow Nation. Do you have any positive words regarding the current situation in South Africa and its people? Is there, I'm not quite sure how this question relates. Is there still some kinds of tensions in South Africa towards?
Yeah, in all honesty, you know, the biggest problem we faced was, and it's something that I'm actually working on myself when I speak to other activists. One of the biggest problems we have is most of our activists that were very active has become capitalists. When they got the taste of money or they had access to money, they forgot what we actually fought for and why we fought. That is why after Nelson Mandela became president, we've had many other presidents after that. The gap between the rich and the poor has gone even bigger. The Freedom Charter we've adopted, which is part of our constitution, they've actually turned a blind eye on that. So yes, one of the biggest problems we do have now is that they are fighting within. We have factions within the ruling party. There are people that actually distance themselves from the party because that is not the ideals and actually what we fought for and what we thought would be. One of our Freedom Charter says a free education for all, free housing for all, free health for all, free. If you look at even just 3 of those, what is it that is free? And yet education is the platform for all our youth and for everybody else. That's important because they are our future leaders. And with the amount of corruption that's been happening and still currently happening, I mean, if you look at 25 years into democracy, I had to move from my place to come to my sister's place to find out, do you have load shedding? Because I have load shedding for 2 hours. So can I come and sit by you because you don't have load shedding? And I think Nelson Mandela will be turning in his grave to see where our country is heading. And, you know, I always maintain that one of the biggest threats would be the worst thing that can happen when we move from apartheid and racism, we move to classism. And that is currently where we are sitting. And that is a danger because that could lead our country into a civil war because the gap between the rich and the poor are getting bigger. We've got more radical, the youth are more radical and under the influence of the EFF and all these other parties that's popping up. And who is to blame is the ANC because these people, the leaders within the ANC have actually changed and they're not following through with what have been set out at various conferences. And I can tell you now with the load shedding, the amount of load shedding that we're having, people are sitting, you know, we're dealing with a crisis in our country where we don't know where we're heading. We don't know what this year has in store for us. They will talk about that will take 2 months to clear. We've already now had load shedding. We're on stage 7, stage 6, stage 7. I mean, this is something that I would never have thought would ever happen.
Wow. So, you know, kind of I think there is a lot of political upheaval almost in every nation of the world right now. It's almost like a big political shift happening and it's very challenging times again. This is another question that came up here, and this one's for Christo. And it's about, you know, in your opinion, how did Mandela not despair during his 27 years in prison? And how did he manage to stay strong? Was there any insight that you had? Like, was he aware, like you were talking in the talk about how very much his mail was censored. Was he aware of the outpouring of support, not just within South Africa, but globally for his release? Was he ever aware that, you know, on my little campus in the middle of Canada, there were posters calling for his release?
Yeah. You know, ma'am, Mandela was 27.5 years in prison under lockdown. We complain about lockdown when he was 2 years on lockdown. But Mandela complained in his lockdown that days was too short because he worked out in a schedule. It was hard labor. It was study time, evening time, church time and things, visiting time. He was complaining about the days too short. But I asked Mandela if he never gave up hope while he was in prison. He said, Mr. Brand, I can never give up hope. Every time when new prisoners come in prison and I get a message, new young people come in, and I get the message what happened in the country, I know the blood is still flowing. People still fight the struggle. That made me stronger from the inside, give me more courage to fight the struggle till the end. Even if I must die in prison, I must stand for a symbol to fight for the freedom of my people. That is when they offered him a freedom in 1984. Mandela rejected the freedom because they want to release him under conditions. And then he said he rather died in prison than to be a free man, and his comrades is not free. You know, that was his situation.
Great. So I have a couple of comments here, and then just people saying my thanks and to all of you, but to especially Igshaan and Christo for their bravery and commitment to moral values at personal risk and cost. Alex, who asked the previous question of Igshaan, is also thanking you for your bravery and your high standards, and how he admires you because he's an ex-South Africa resident growing up and benefiting from white privilege all of my life in several countries where I have lived since leaving in '76. I've recently found that my ancestors, going back several generations in South Africa, included slave and indentured workers from South India and Sri Lanka, many the same who enjoy white status in South Africa apartheid. How ironic. So we have somebody here that Igshaan, you were speaking to very, very directly and making a great difference today in being here. And Christo, we have somebody else here just, again, thanking you again for standing up and doing what's right and being brave when you needed to. And the final question that came in is just someone again saying, wanting to know when exactly the USA tour is scheduled. I don't think we have an exact date yet, but Andrew, I think you're looking at November.
Yeah, we are, Janie. The first 2 weeks of November is what we're planning. So the first 2 weeks in November. And yeah, as I said earlier, if there is anyone who does want to contact us, they can email on that email address, info@christobrand.co.za. And you know what happened during lockdown, which was amazing. We were sitting here. What we did was we developed a talk like the one we did this evening, and we did it remotely to schools and universities all over the world. So if there are people listening now who want to contact us, and we can always arrange a remote talk. We did one this week with a group in England called Unlocked Graduates, which is a group that trains people to become prison guards. And we had a session with their prison guard trainees. So, you know, even though we're sitting here in Cape Town and our borders are open, we're still doing remote talks. So if there is anyone who wants to reach out to us in that way, we can arrange a session like the one we did this evening.
Right. We have somebody on here, Rune. I don't know how I say that.
Rune, yeah.
Rune.
He's our friend, yeah.
He's a friend saying he would recommend that anyone who travels to South Africa to book private meetings or tours with Christo and Igshaan, because it will change your life. And that's very high words and deeds. And I think today has been very life-changing for anybody who's on here to have the chance to listen to this. So first of all, I'm going to wrap things up by saying that we are so grateful that we have a North American edition of this book that's been published and updated. Thank you, Ethan and Andrew, for all your work to get that across the finish line. And to, you know, making sure that it can get out there. And what I like about this, a new edition of the book, it's very accessible. I think it, personally, as a librarian, I think it, especially with the essays added to it, it gives lots of context for like high school teachers to use as a classroom text. It's extremely readable, very well done. So that's Blue Air Books, but if you go to Amazon, you just type in Doing Life with Mandela and Andrew Russell's name to bring up the exact North American copy and help support Blue Air Books, who have brought this across the finish line. And you know, we're going to hopefully we were talking before that we will have a stop on the tour in November. We're going to work on that here in New Jersey, Princeton region. And so I guess I'm going to just ask everybody to say their final goodbyes. And we have someone else thanking Christo for spending so much time with us again, who traveled to South Africa since 2004, when they first met you at the Robben Island ferry. So
that's my mom. That's my mom.
Oh, that's okay. That's Ethan's mom is on here. Oh, I like that. Hi, Ethan's mom. You got a great son. Okay, so everybody just want to do you have a final closing thought?
No, I think Janie, just thanks once again for inviting us. You know, the issues we've raised are universal in so many different ways, and we scratched the surface this evening. But it is through dialogue, it is through having people like Igshaan, who was at the coalface, you know, to have experienced what he's been through. It's about storytelling, you know. And these two gentlemen, for me, it's a privilege to work with them. So thank you for inviting us.
Thank you. And I will say, Andrew keeps saying this evening, I will remind you that, yes, here in New Jersey, it's about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They're probably going on, what, 10 o'clock at night now over there?
10 past 10, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
so
bedtime for us old people.
bedtime over there. Yeah, that's why we did this event on a Sunday afternoon, was because of the time difference.
Perfect.
And Eugene Smith says, I commend you all the best for the rest. And we have lots of people in the chat giving you thanks and applause, which is great. So Christo, Igshaan, Andrew, we're going to let you go off and get some sleep now. And hopefully we're going to see you when you come stateside. And Ethan, again, congratulations on getting this book. It's North American publication. Oops, wait a minute. We have one more message coming in. Any chance to get contact for you, Igshaan? Cape Town next month, and have a group that would love to chat with you.
Yeah, they can email me as well on my email, and then I'll forward it to Igshaan. So that's the best way, is to just get,
yes,
get
you
hold
can
of
email me at the library. We'll make sure that we contact
Brilliant.
you.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. And goodbye from Princeton Public Library.
Thank you.
We'll see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ethan.
Bye-bye.
Thank you
Bye.
all.
Greetings to your mom.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye, Chris.
Bye-bye.